We're here this afternoon at the home of Fran and Sam Newman, aka Rawhide. And we're going to try to tell the story of how the hybrid striped bass come to be in Lake Norman. This year's our 5th annual Hybrid Striped Bass Association's tournament, and we've named that in honor of one of Rawhide's partners, David Clubb, who was instrumental in getting the hybrids in Lake Norman. And Rawhide's been fishing on the lake since it was dammed up, so we're going to have a very interesting story to tell from him. So, Rawhide?
Well, I think we need to start at the hybrid striper stocking. There's a lot of history that we talked about here this morning that's not part of what I think we're going to honor David Clubb, the owner of Race City Pest Control, with. And
Race City Roofing.
I mean Race City Roofing. And we want to honor David Clubb. He's a great man. He passed away now, but he was the man instrumental of stocking hybrid stripers into Lake Norman, the man most responsible for getting the hybrid stripers in Lake Norman. And that's a long story, so I'll begin with a phone call that we received from Southland Fisheries in Hopkins, South Carolina. It's a 200-acre fish farm and hatchery. It's owned by 2 Clemson graduates, the biologists from Clemson, and that's how we met the Southland Fisheries. They were looking for somebody to help them to breed stripers and white bass that's known as a hybrid striper. And one day there's a guy there from Lake Norman that was there collecting hybrid brim to stock a pond he owned in Virginia. And one of the owners of that business in Hopkins asked him, did he know anybody that could help him get stripers that he could use for stocking in his program to produce hybrid stripers. And he says, yes, a guy named Sam Newman on Lake Norman. So I get a phone call one day from one of the owners, and we talked, and I found out what he wanted. And then I talked to David Clubb if he would be interested in adventure into that part of stocking. And he says, we don't know anything about the hybrid stripers, but if all he wants us to do to help him is to catch Lake Norman stripers that's 24, 25 inches long, and we'll put them in my tank on Cornelius Road at Race City Roofing office. And that's how it began. And after we caught 8 to 10, I would call the hatchery. They would send a hatchery truck to the club's location, and they paid Norman Fishery Alliance. They didn't pay Clubb or Sam Newman. The check was made out to Norman Fishery Alliance, and they paid us $50 per fish. And they carried them back in the hatchery truck to Hopkins, South Carolina, and that's what they bred. Our fish is what they bred the white bass with.
Right. And originally, you were getting those fish for them. You said they needed to send them to China, so they were sending...
Yeah. In the beginning, we didn't know what they were doing with our striper, except they were breeding them with the white bass. And we didn't know if they were raising hybrid stripers into fingerlings or fries or real fish. But when we got down there the first time, we found out that the stripers and the hybrids, the stripers and the white bass that they were breeding was going to be bagged in oxygenated bags, put in a cooler, and then into a shipping carton and taped up, addressed, and taken to the Columbia airport and flown to China, and they had 33 hours to get them from the airport to the next airport so they could offload them into the China water. The Chinese took control of them after they got over there, and these boys was through just getting them to China.
Right. And so I guess you and David then come up with, all right, so our stripers are having kill-offs on Lake Norman, and so you decided you were just going to try to see if these hybrid striped bass could make it in Lake Norman?
That's exactly what happened. When we were down there talking about it to these two partners, we reached an agreement with those two partners that they would never pay us any more money. We would barter the stocking that we did in the Lake Norman for the fish that we gave them, and we did that for the next five years. That's how it worked. And the second year we did that, the first year we did it, we just brought it back in plain bags, which was a lot of trouble. The next year, Clubb made a deal with the boys that we would like to buy the shipping cartons, the cooler, and tape them up and transport them back to Lake Norman so that we could stock them here easier than the first time we did it. And everything went great.
So tell us, I was under the impression that when I was hearing these stories that it was bucket stocking and you guys had fries and you put them in the bucket, or fingerlings. And now, since talking to you some more, I found out that it was actually just a fry or an embryo of a fish. It wasn't even really a fish.
No.
And so tell us about, what that looked like and, where you put them in the lake, because that's really interesting, where you put them in the lake.
Okay. The fry in those bags, when you pick those bags up, you can't see from this side to that side. There were so many clouds of these mouths working of the fry in that bag. And the survival rate, now you talk about the fingerlings that people stock, and the wildlife is stocking them now. They are like a crappie minnow. They are about that long. Mm-hmm. And the survival rate of that fish being stocked is 15, they're about 15% of the stocking. The survival rate of a fry going in the water is 1%. And that sounds like a small amount. Mm-hmm. That's the reason you don't put 300,000 fingerlings in, you put 3 million fry and let them grow. And it worked. And our stocking was never in sunlight. Today is cloudy, rainy. It's a perfect day to stock fish or stock fry. And we never stocked them in the same location. We went to many back of the coves, all the way from Stutz Marina to the marina at the bridge at Perth Road.
Old Skippers, Rocky Creek, I think that is,
yeah,
right?
that creek, yeah.
Right.
We go under that bridge and stock them back there.
Did you ever take any under the bridge back there? The other one at what is it, Gold Mine Island back in there? Did you put any back in there?
Yes, that's the Gold Mine Island is McCurry Creek.
No, McQuarrie's down there across from the hot hole.
Yeah. Yes, we did. Gold Mine Island is famous, and it was famous because people dug gold up in the day. But that's the creek that Dale Earnhardt lived in, was to the right past the school system now. Mm-hmm. And then if you go to the left, there's another bridge up there, it's Cornelius Road Bridge.
Right.
Yes, that's where we stocked them.
Yeah.
And always in 3-foot water.
Well, what I found interesting about that when you were telling me originally is the places that you put those fry are the places that those striper are right now.
Yeah.
I mean, you still, all the places that you mentioned, Little Creek, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people in there catching fish at Little Creek. Gold Mine or Governor's Island, behind Governor's Island.
Catching hybrid stripers?
Yeah, that's where they're going right now, this time of year, as the water cools down. What's wrong with it? Oh, it's down like this? Okay. Gotcha.
Well, that is interesting that they would go back to almost their birthplace.
It is. It's crazy. And then probably, and what I'm relating to that is, you put those fry in there, and then the wildlife guys are putting fingerlings in.
5 or 6 years later.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years later. And if those guys are meeting up with those original guys and they're saying, hey, come over here, this is where we live. But those are the hot spots right now that people are catching hybrids.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
So what year did you first stock them?
The exact year is hard to pull together, but I'm going to say 80, 90, 96, 97, and I don't have that in writing. That's just 85-year-old man trying to remember. Yeah. And but it was after we got the system set up, then it would become easy for David Clubb and me to bring the boxes, coordinated boxes, back. It took the one that went to Hopkins to pick up the fry. Most times somebody rode with us. And then sometime a member of the Norman Fishery Alliance would take over from Clubb and me and go down and get the 9 boxes, bring them back for us, which is, 4 hours of driving down and back. And then when they come back with them, we offload them out of their vehicle into my boat that had a covered slip and out of the sun, because you would not want to stock a fish, a fry in sunlight. We were taught by these 2 biologists at the hatchery, if it's sunny, wait until the sun goes down. When it is cloudy, getting dark, and that's the way we did it.
Now you said you stocked them always in 3 feet of water. Is there any significance to that?
The biologists, the 2 fishery biologists, they're pros. I asked them one day, should we dump them in or release them in 60-foot water or 20-foot water? And he says 3-foot water for more survival.
Can't beat a pro. So after you guys, released that first, and I call them generations, because after you released the, first year wasn't so many. The second year you guys stepped it up a little bit and did that. After you did that, how many years was it before, you actually either heard of somebody catching one in a net or actually catching one with a hook, or how many years was it before you got a return on what you did?
5 years.
5 years before you even knew if the first one had ever made it.
Yeah. The fry up to a 16-inch hybrid striper was 5 years.
Took them 5 years to get that big. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I got you. So then, Rawhide, when did the wildlife people hear about it and catch on to they were in the lake and they weren't supposed to be there? How was that in that 5 years, or?
Right at the end of the 5 years, going into 6 years, there was enough people fishing for them or accidentally catching them that they didn't believe what they had, and they asked the wildlife what kind of fish it was, and they didn't believe it because they didn't stock it. And that's the way the wildlife would not. If 3 fish was taken to a wildlife officer or to the headquarters and say, I caught these in Lake Norman, the first thing they're going to say, no, you didn't, because there's none of these fish in Lake Norman. That's how it was. And then it wasn't long, they were up here taking samples from people and themselves, trying to catch them on a hook, not with a net. Mm-hmm. And they caught enough, and they identified them as a hybrid striper.
Right.
That was the wildlife people from Raleigh.
Yeah, and without really calling anybody's name in Raleigh or telling us what you really think about some of them guys up there in Raleigh, what did they actually think about it when they found out they were there?
They still had a hard time believing it because they didn't stock them. They didn't think that 2 old country boys like you're talking to, and you and David Clubb and other people, we wasn't smart enough to do what we did. But we were, and we did. And I finally told Fred Harris from the Wildlife Department in Raleigh, I says, I know you didn't put them in the NFA club, fishing organization, Norman Fishery Lights. We put them in. He says, you can't do that because they're not already in Lake Norman. I says, they are now. And you can't write me a ticket now.
Because they didn't catch you.
But because you can add to a fishery if the fishery has that fish in it. You just can't put a new fish in a fishery that's not already there. It's a violation.
Gotcha.
One time it's a violation. You can stock them another 10 years and it's not a violation because they're already there.
I got you.
They're there.
Yeah.
So they sent their wildlife people in. They started testing. They said, by George, there is hybrid in here now. And when or how did you guys get those guys in Raleigh on board on Lake Norman will sustain these fish? They need them. When did that come about?
I can't. It was in the early 90s, but I can't tell you what year. I can tell you how it happened.
Okay.
The biologist, Van Horn, and Chief of Inland Fisheries knew that we had done it. We were successful, and to make them look like they were earning their money, they wanted to take over the stocking of the hybrid striper from us to their department. And they wanted to stock fingerlings instead of fry. And their fingerlings was come from their hatcheries down in Weldon. And that that sounded good to us, to me, and Clubb, because we'd worked a long time getting it there. And we sat down. I says, we don't do this on the telephone. I says, you come to Lake Norman and meet with our club anytime you want to meet, and we'll meet at Big Daddy's restaurant. So we'll have a record of what we're going to agree on. And in that meeting, we agreed for the wildlife to take over the stocking. We would stop as long as they kept their word. And the proof of that word is that every time your hatchery truck comes to Lake Norman, one of the people in this room is going to be there as a witness that you actually live up to your word and you stocked them. And they stocked them at 2 locations, one at up towards the bridge at the marina on the left, and at Stumpy Creek.
Long Island?
Long Island.
Yeah, up that way, yeah.
So
Bill's Marina?
Yeah.
And Stumpy Creek, yeah.
Yeah.
Funny thing, them fish sure do like it up in there above that bridge. Yeah.
So, and we told them, if you ever fail to live up to, and we got this in writing, if you ever fail to live up to your obligations, we will start stocking again, because it won't take us but 3 weeks to get back into business. And that's how we left it.
Yeah. Well, so when did you first start? You know, I remember when I was fishing down there, I think I met you like, it was 2010. And, you know, I would be fishing on one side of the lake in my boat. You'd be over pulling live bait on the other side. And I was a troller and Rawhide was a live baiter. And when did you, and you were, I mean, a diehard live baiter. But eventually, I began to see you trolling out there with some artificial stuff. So tell us a little bit about what made you switch, and, you know, because a lot of people now are out there pulling either Alabama or A rigs, and very few umbrella rigs is what I was originally pulling around out there catching fish.
Yeah.
So when did you make that switch from live bait over to artificial baiting?
Well, my family moved to Lake Norman into our first lake house up in the state park in 1982. And I was a golfer, XJC, I'm a Shriner, a Mason, and all that stuff, so we kept busy. And then eventually, I played a little golf with Toothache. You know who Toothache is?
Oh yeah, yep.
And Doc, he's a dentist. But anyway, I played golf with him, but golf got to be boring to me a little bit. So in my hangout after work was pork bait and tackle. And there's 40 of us that was in and out. It was either crappie fishing, largemouth fishing, or striper fishing. And it was striper fishing that I was interested in. So the owner of that business, Gene Houston, took me fishing with him in his boat and his equipment, and we caught 2 or 3 stripers. And that's what I started fishing for. Took me up until 85, 86 to get good at it. Well, to know what I was doing. And that's the way that worked out. Now, my favorite bait of all times to pull for stripers in Lake Norman was a 6-inch crappie. And I'll tell you that story. I'm fishing at 17 A and B right about dark on Tuesday. Day's Tuesday. Right about dark. And the Iredale Fishing Game Club met every Tuesday night. And anybody that fished that day could take their catch over there, and Junior Wong, the chef, would clean them, we'd eat them. I didn't have anything in my boat that afternoon. I looked over to Catawba County, and there was whitewater going everywhere. So I eased over there the best I could, excited, and there is a 12-pound striper with a 1.5-pound crappie in his gills that he was trying to descale, because a striper won't take a bait fish like a crappie until he puts it in his gills and blows all the scales off. And then he swallows it, and then it goes. But he was dying, the crappie was dying. I netted them both, carried them to the fish game club, and we ate them that night. But got me thinking, that fish ate a crappie. And that was the beginning of my, that was the beginning of using crappie and brim. The fisherman gave me a name, trash bait. They called it trash bait.
Oh, okay.
And the rest is history about that.
Well, speaking of names, so tell us how you got the name Rawhide.
From fishing in water, from fishing in conditions where everybody else went home. Boat full of sleet and snow, cloudy, probably too much wind for anybody to be out in. The second time I caught the big fish, and then the first big fish I caught was in the state park, and it was rough, but you couldn't fish the way I fish in a bass boat. You'd freeze you know what, to death. My fishing boat has always been like Lund's, side curtains, top, close the windshield, have a heater in the boat, in a commode. And the only thing that ever gets cold when you dress for it is your hands when you're messing with bait and the fish. But you can sit down with that heater and slide them in wool gloves and go on.
Right.
And that's how the name came about.
Said it skin tough as rawhide or something like that.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
And but David Clubb, that you're going to honor at your tournament, he did more for stocking bait and new fish in this lake than anybody else.
Well, and that's why, Trevor knew this year that we needed to include his name in there, because if it wasn't for his efforts and yours and the Norman Fishery Alliance and everybody that contributed money, to help you guys buy those baits and what you did for the hybrids, they may not be there today. And there certainly wouldn't be those big ones that are in that generation of fish that really nobody even knew about, for 5 years. So the fish that, if somebody's lucky enough to catch a 6 or 7 pound fish or 8 pound fish, if they ever get there, that'll be the fish that you guys started with, and hopefully it's a sustainable fishery for years to come, because it was close to over for the striper fishery in Norman. It had got to the point where the keels had been so severe that the clubs had folded up, the fishing clubs, the guides were not getting any business because there was no fish to catch, and they didn't feel good about taking a guy out there fishing and giving them a boat ride when they were supposed to be catching fish. And, the things that you guys did, you got guides out there that are making a living doing it again. The fishing community is growing again. People are out there talking on the radios, VHFs, like they used to.
And the bait in Norman is plenty.
We have plenty of bait, and So the Hybrid Striped Bass Association wants to thank you for what you did. We want to honor David Clubb for what he did. And, you know, Toothache or any of those other guys in the Norman Fishery Alliance that had anything to do with, you know, saving that fishery. And that's what you did.
Yeah.
So we want to thank you for that. And thank you for your time.
In the memory of David Clubb, I'm going to cry. In the memory of David Clubb, I'll shake your hand.
Well, we appreciate everything you guys did.
He was the man most responsible, not me.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
And thank you and Fran for letting us come into your home this afternoon.